Thanks for coming, guys. This is what I do for fun. This is when I'm not building the cabin. This is what I do for fun, right? This collection is about something that I didn't even realize I was writing about. I was talking to a friend years ago about loss, and I realized I had never gone through a period of significant loss and bereavement in my life. Never lost anybody close to me. And as this friend was talking to me, we slowly realized that that wasn't true, that I had gone through significant losses in my life and was grieving those losses in different ways, slowly and more rapidly in some cases. And the flow of elements, natural elements, became a very natural way for me to explore those losses. And that's what this book really turned out to be. I also like, more generally, to write poetry because there are no rules. It's awesome. When I write at work, there are rules. And I recently helped write a 600-page report for the state of Connecticut, which is their water plan. And 2 words out of that 600 pages kept it from getting approved. Just 2 words. And we tried for months to change those 2 words. And we couldn't find replacements that would work. So poetry is an escape from all that, because I know a poem is done when I can read it to 4 different people and each one tells me something different about it. They interpret it differently. That's when I know it's a good poem, especially if you want to read it again. But the point is, language is fluid, and so are the elements, and that's sort of the genesis of this book. The other reason I wrote it is that there are a lot of people in the world who don't have water, don't have sanitation, and the money that I'll make from the book sales will go to Water for People. And if you don't know about them, they bring water and sanitation, sewers, to people in the world who don't have it. On a percentage basis, how many people would you guess don't have clean drinking water in the world? That's a pretty good guess. It's about 25 to 30%. That's a lot of people, billions of people who don't have clean water. Now, how about sewerage? When you flush your toilet, we don't think about it. It just goes away. But more than half of the people in the world don't have that. Nothing. It sits there in their yard, in the dirt. And so Water for People is a group that goes around the world and brings the facilities and the technology to bring clean water to these people and their families, and to take the dirty water away and keep them healthy. So it's a great organization. So the money will go to them. So I have just a handful of poems that I'll share. It's really hard to come out of the house on a weeknight for poems. I understand that, especially when there's a football game on. But you guys did, and so I want to share some with you. Just a handful. The first one is really the title poem. It's called Bodies of Water. And I had the privilege to read this at the wedding of a friend just a couple years ago in Michigan. And it was on an island in Lake Michigan, Mackinac. Have you been there? The fudge is great. Right? The bike rides are great. It's a wonderful place. And the wedding was on a terrace, and as you looked out at the lake, it was a gray, overcast day. You couldn't tell where the water ended and the sky began, or vice versa. It was kind of astonishing, because that's what this poem is about. It's called Bodies of Water. If I was sky and you were lake, arching over, slipping under, we would wake and we would sleep, always facing one another. We would replenish. I would fill your depths and you would breathe a warm vapor into my mouth. My white and gray have been you, and your gray and blue have been me. And in between the colors, liquid questions rise and fall in shapes of crescents, waiting to hold their answers. How then did we ever live before? I would see my sun-fired brim reflected deep within you, stirred now what in me alone was still. And you would tell me it had always been there, just as your white birds have always leaned into the currents of my wind. And I would rest against you softly, knowing that before never existed. That was a fun one to read on Lake Michigan. This next one, I'll just read maybe a half dozen poems. This next one is one of my favorites, but nobody else likes it. I tried for many, many years to publish this. Nobody would publish it, so I said, forget it, I'll put it in the book. Now they have to take it. It's called Consecration, and it's a poem of acceptance and confession and really asking for forgiveness. Consecration. I am the fallen hemlock beside the trail, dry rot pulp and moss breath, the naked rib cage of my sins spindling outward at incomplete angles, remembering the heavy lattice of their green-black days. Please, as you pass by, break off a branch each day. Snap it to the trunk, in pieces if you must, leaving nothing, so that one day I may rest here, proud as a mainmast, or as the noble elegy of some great spire. That's my prayer of confession, if you will. Here's one that we can probably all relate to. We've all lived this. I lived this when I was recovering from my knee replacement, so that added an extra tinge to this poem. This is called Tender. If you live in the north, which we all do, you will wake up one deep night at 2 o'clock to discover that your furnace is out and that outside the frost kicks in single digits, brittling through the cracks in the old windows. And you will see your breath in the stairwell, telling you to shoulder first your coat and then as many logs as you can trundle through the deep. Your forearms will strain, remembering the hoisted maul, now hauling wood before its time. And you will start a fire and protect it all night, as if you were watching for the subtle flare of nostrils or the rising chest of a sleeping newborn. And you will run the faucets gently, so that the pipes outrun the frost, and you will not sleep until the fire breathes steadily and the water runs evenly, quietly, without a rattle. The fragile flow of elements, and you, the tender. Has that ever happened? Has your furnace ever gone out?
Yeah.
It happens to everybody. It happens to everybody. This is another prayer of confession, really. It's metaphorical. It uses the forest, but it really speaks of needing to be cleansed of things. It's called, If I Ever Build a Church. I've built a cabin. Maybe someday I'll build a church. I'm working my way up. I started with a shed and cabin, and maybe one day. If I ever build a church, I will use red cedar. Calm forgiveness, the scent and lifeblood of every beam, and in it I will light a candle in the name of the one tree that stood proudly on the misty hill, just down the tracks, outreaching the other cedars until the day that I felled it, limbed it, hitched it to my waist, and hauled it down the trail with knotted muscle and some rope, and stacked its bleeding boards outside my open window, where for days they purified my house with incense, before rising again as an auburn-paneled door away, and a lofty ridgepole at the apex of a roof, of a space made otherwise from pine and oak and cherry long since dead. And I would kneel in this church, seeking absolution, for revealing the Spirit, having worn the breastplate of the centurion, breaking the flesh. I'll read a couple more, but I want to share a writing tip. This is something that's really important. If you learn nothing else tonight, if you remember nothing else, remember this. I travel a lot for my job. I work with rivers and they can't come to me. I have to go to them. And so I travel a lot. And I love that. I enjoy it. But I often travel alone. People ask me to come and take a look at the rivers and sort of figure them out. And often I find myself dining alone at night in faraway cities, and I bring my poetry book with me. That's where I write a lot of poetry. Spend the evening writing because I have time to myself. There are no kids screaming for help with homework. Not that that's a bad thing, but it's nice to have some time to yourself every once in a while. But let me ask you this. A guy sitting in the corner of a restaurant alone, shirt and coat, writing in a little notebook, shutting it, taking a bite, writing. What do I look like? I look like a food critic. Every time. I've gotten some good stuff from writing my poetry. I'm never going to make a living writing poetry, but I get a lot of free drinks and a lot of free food because they think I'm there writing about them. It's a good trick.
Do that next time.
Give it a shot. I've challenged people to try it and see what happens. This is one that I wrote in Oklahoma City during one of those nights, and probably over a free glass of wine. See if you guys can figure out what this is about. Okay? It's called Day's Work. Gray reveals the air again, thick enough to ply and laden with the palpitations of yesterday's wake. Dark was cold, but now I move about, and the cold is why I work today, and why my wings unfold with a weak, uncertain crack. Before I scavenge enough fill, we are gathered suddenly aloft, a burst of stiff, unready flight, and feeling more of bone than feather, I press my way into the V, and now again the everything below moves but never changes. Hypnotic draft and undulation, those ahead and to the left pull as if the lift and thrust of body wings is divined by some spirit of chains and sprockets. And we pray that this something to hold our loft, our form above this ache, and to let us feel again the brush beneath our chin, along our neck. For though we fly with oiled precision, we forget each day what it is to fly, until the gray returns and calls us down, and I unfurl into the billow of air, and then water, and then dark, and then me. Tomorrow, we work again toward another ending. Who wrote that? If it wasn't me, who wrote that? Who's the speaker? You might think it's even closer to me if I told you it's a goose. A goose. That's their work. They fly and they eat. But sometimes when they fly, they forget what a feeling that is. And we do the same thing. When we work, we forget how good it feels to work. That's what that poem's about. So let me choose one or two more here. Here we go. A couple more. You know I'm building a cabin, right? So I have to write about it. You've helped me build it, and you've helped me build it. We worked on the front porch together. This is called the Cabin Trilogy, 3 short poems about this cabin. And I wrote these before I started to build it. It was still an idea in my head. I didn't know what it would look like. I hadn't designed it. I hadn't found the land. But I knew that someday I would do this. And so it's an imagination of sharing the experience with somebody and creating this space that is really unimaginable until you see it. The first one is called Leathered. These hands prepare for work, leathering their palms and oiling their knuckles with the tannins and the warm sap of hardwoods. I'll put my books aside a while, and I haven't read books in a long time, because my hands want only the shanks of gray cracked wood and iron, the axe, the saw, the peavey, made for men with chests and shoulders and foreheads of oxen. And these hands will raise from weathered trees a shelter, strong enough to bend back rain and soft enough to hold you there. They will cut and haul, crack and bleed, steady my back and break my fall. It actually did break my fall and broke my wrist. Raise a glass of rough whiskey and then wipe the evening brow. And when they once again lay down their tools, I'll wash them with tea leaves, and they too will be soft enough to hold you there. The second piece is called Cups. You spread the morning forest at our feet. You dip your hands into the valley bowl and press a dewberry into my mouth. You draw the river mist through umber soil and pour it in our cups, earthen cups, bought with a blue-glazed bowl to hold this day until it wakes, to hold the first taste of the mountain. I'll make the bed if you make breakfast. And the third piece is called Window. A life already lived, it gathers dust and cobwebs on flaccid panes that once collected light. It lit 1,000 days of rest, 10,000 more of work, and all the days of fever. At night it spilled a family's embers on the leaves outside, and then spread butter on the morning bread in quiet preparation. When we find it forgotten behind crisp and peeling plywood or old apple crates in a barn, and mounted in the kitchen as the keystone of this space, it will fill our days with the light of 1,000 cities, bronze our wood, warm our bread, and share our embers with the owls. I'll read one other short one and then maybe one other. This is written in honor of a young man who passed away. This was the son of a friend who was 24 years old. He lived and worked in Arizona on a reservation for the Hopi Indians, and he helped them grow corn. You know, he grew up in New York and decided that what he wanted to do with his life is go to Arizona and help the Hopi Indians grow corn. And every day he slept out in the desert. He made a little wooden platform for himself. He slept in the desert and was walking home one night from the fields, and a truck hit him and killed him. And they never found the driver of the truck, but they found him. The interesting thing about the experience is the Hopi people believe that the spirits of the departed return to them in the form of rain, which is their sustenance. They're in the middle of the desert. And those who they lose, they believe come back to them as the rain that continues to give them life. And a month after this happened, I was flying out to California, and we flew over Arizona. And I have flown over Arizona hundreds of times, and you always see the desert. But on that day, all the way to the horizon were rain clouds. It was amazing. So this is a poem in honor of him. His name was Max. It's called Body of Water again. O river, will you dance with me, the song of our own composition? Turn to me and quench my thirst, our bodies chest to chest. My river, curl your eddy breath around my neck and shoulder muscles. Pour our names from one deep sigh as the watershed exhales. And river, turn me in your palm, between your silver sheets of rain. Burnish me, meander me, and lift me from these stones. O river, take me under now, in robes of our evaporation. Take my breath emulsified. Your current now am I. And then river, as your rain I'll fall. Remember how my aspect faced you, how I hummed your fluvial runes, and tumbling learned this dance. That's from Max. Let me read one more. The reason I like to read this one to people is because I don't remember writing it at all. I hope it was me who wrote it. I've claimed credit for it, but maybe it was one of those nights where I'd been given one too many free glasses of wine at a restaurant. But I read it, in my book. Presumably I thought, well, that's not bad. It's kind of interesting. I just don't remember, have no recollection at all of ever writing this. It's called And You Replied. I asked you for a glass of wine, and you poured me a pitcher of water. I asked you for a place to rest, and you pointed to a high trail. I asked your name, and you picked me a handful of cherries. I told you I was broken, and you placed a bluebird in my hands. I asked if you would like to know my name. You said you did already. I asked you how, and you led me up the trail to an outcrop where we rested and drank water and ate cherries and set free that fragile bird. And as we followed it with our eyes, you whispered, the way it knows where it is going, even from this unknown stone, that is how I know you. I hope I wrote that.
I like that. I'm sure you did. Yeah.
It sounds kind of like me.
Yeah.
Thank you guys for coming out today. I really appreciate it. This was fun. I just sitting around and sharing this. Thank you very much. I appreciate it. I hope you enjoyed it. Thanks.